Okay, beautiful. Alrighty. So, managing workplace conflict. So this is really just a short, sharp session that we designed really because lately we've had a number of workplace relations and training inquiries related to managing conflict in the workplace. I was recently working with an employer who they'd actually had a workplace conflict that's been going on for a couple of years. And some of the consequences of that were quite significant. So I thought this would be a good topic just to, I guess, do a short overview on. And of course, if you have any questions at the end, you're more than welcome to ask them then. So we'll proceed. We're going to cover off what is workplace conflict, some of the common causes of workplace conflict, some strategies that we can use to identify workplace conflict, because it's not always, that really overt, obvious conflict. Sometimes it's a little bit more passive or subtle, but just as destructive nonetheless. When to acknowledge and address workplace conflicts. We don't necessarily want to insert ourselves in all of the battles that occur in a workplace, but we'll talk about which ones we do. Some common responses to conflict, as well as consequences of not managing it, and a few strategies to try and manage it more effectively. So the definition of conflict is really that disagreement or struggle between people with opposing needs, ideas, beliefs, values, or goals, or more commonly described as people not getting along. And conflict within a workplace can be within a team, or it may also be between different teams, or potentially different people within different teams. Some of the causes of conflict often we'll treat the symptoms of conflict, but not necessarily the cause. And one of the examples that comes to mind, and is quite a common one, is where people might be disagreeing over who should be doing what, or whose responsibility is what. And yes, we can address that at an individual level by providing that clarity, but sometimes it might be an organisation-wide cause of conflict, where people sort of just do what they've always done, or the things that they think that they're supposed to be doing. And sometimes it's a more systematic cause of that conflict, which is really about having clarity around the roles and responsibilities and the various interactions between those roles. Communication is a very common cause of conflict, or miscommunication or misunderstanding. Sometimes people will make a comment or send an email with a certain intention, and the way that that comment or the email is perceived is not necessarily how the person that sent it intended it to be. Communication is something that people generally think that they're quite good at, but a lot of the causes of conflict are really just that misunderstanding or miscommunication between individuals or teams. Personality or value clashes is also a really common cause of conflict. In some ways, it can be easier to resolve if we get in early, and it's really just about sort of supporting that diversity and helping people to focus on the job and what we're here to do, not necessarily how somebody might go about it. Sometimes the conflict is about, a scarcity of resources, having too much work, or feeling like people have got too much work to do, having things happening, outside of work. So we'll often talk about, trying to get to know the people that we work with, not so that we can spy on them, but having an understanding of what people are experiencing outside of the workplace can sometimes help us understand, if people might be a little bit snappy or stressed in the workplace. As I said, that lack of clarity around role and responsibility is quite a common cause of conflict. And look, some people are just difficult, and that can be a cause of conflict in itself. Particularly when the people around them aren't given strategies on how to manage that person that's difficult. I had one of those people this morning, was doing a presentation on an organisation's leave policy, and this person just, argued the point over and over again. And it's just a difficult person, and me 10 years ago may have ended up in quite a significant conflict situation with that person, but over the years we developed some strategies on how not to let those kind of people bother us. So we could probably spend an hour just talking about the different causes of conflict, but I think it's really important to look past the symptoms of conflict and look to see whether or not there's something within the organisation that we can impact that might stop it occurring again. Humans are a needy bunch, and one of the lines I often use when delivering workplace training is that humans are without fail two things: they are judgy and they are needy. And both of these things result in, or can result in, conflict in the workplace. And sometimes the causes of conflict are just people not having their individual human needs met. We don't walk around with a manual on how we like to be treated, but I tell you what, if somebody doesn't follow the rule book, then that can sometimes lead to conflict. And so people want to feel welcome. So you might have two people working together. One of them is a super friendly, chatty person, and somebody else is a bit more reserved. The super chatty person thinks that the reserved person doesn't like them or has a problem with them because they don't say hello to them. When in actual fact, it's just that different need of how we might make people feel welcome in the workplace. People want to feel important, and that doesn't necessarily involve rolling out the red carpet and playing the bagpipes when people come to work, but often conflict can arise if somebody feels like they're not respected in the workplace, or that people don't see them as, or their role as important. People want to feel like they've been understood. And again, that's kind of coming back to what I was talking about the actual cause of conflict, is to really understand where each party is coming from, and perhaps help them understand each other's perspective a little bit better. And the last of those human needs, the psychological or the physical comfort's pretty straightforward. People want to be physically comfortable. The psychological comfort is really about people feeling safe and secure, and confident that they're in the right place, doing the right things, to a certain degree, and it varies by person, that they are liked and respected within the workplace. And if they don't have that, then sometimes that can lead to conflict. So there's a number of ways that we can identify workplace conflict. Sometimes it's that word of mouth, or a bit of gossip going around about such and such aren't talking to each other because of blah 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 blah, or oh gee, you should have been here yesterday afternoon because there was a real showdown with those two people. They're often the symptoms of conflict that, in my experience, can often be ignored because nobody's actually made a formal complaint. If I'm the manager and I wasn't there, then I'm like, not my circus, not my monkeys. So I'll get involved if somebody wants me to. We might observe how people interact with each other in the workplace. Team meetings, staff meetings are a really good place to be able to pick up if there are tensions between individuals. Informal conversations with people, just that casual, while we're making a coffee in the kitchen, how's everything going? Some people will go down the path of making a formal complaint if there's a conflict situation going on. We can also look at how people are behaving and how things feel in the workplace culture, and people's general demeanour. If you've noticed a shift in how people are behaving, or in just general attitudes or the feel within your workplace, then there may be something going on that's worth investigating to see whether or not there's some underlying conflict. And some of the, I guess, the more bottom line focused symptoms of conflict are a reduction in productivity, particularly if there's a serious conflict, because everybody's busy talking about the conflict and not necessarily focusing on their role. You might notice an increase in absenteeism, not just from the people involved in the conflict, but potentially people that have to work around that. It's not fun having that workplace conflict. In the example I was talking about before, the conflict had been going on for quite some time, and both of the people involved in the conflict had been trying to get the various team members on their side. So if you're somebody that does not want to take a side, then that can really make it quite stressful coming to work and potentially increase absenteeism, or in extreme cases, it may actually contribute to staff turnover. So, it might not be the people having the conflict that are leaving, it might be the people around them because they don't want to deal with it anymore. So I think it's important to always acknowledge conflict and consider the source of that conflict, and then determine the appropriateness, sorry, I can't talk, of the intervention. So, many years ago, I used to run a restaurant, and I had two people that said that they refused to work with each other because somebody had slept with somebody's boyfriend on Saturday night, and that was a conflict that I said, I'm not getting involved in. I expect you to be professional and work together. If your conflict has been created outside of the workplace, then the workplace is not the place to deal with it. So I am a fan of, making sure that whatever the source of the conflict is, that it is something that is relevant to the workplace, not something that's going on outside of. And Tasmania is a very small state. So often there can be conflicts that have actually arisen from things that have occurred outside the workplace that are really not within the scope of the organisation to deal with. Bit like I have 2 children in high school, social media is quite toxic, and there was some inappropriate behaviours going on social media, and as the school said, we can't intervene because it hasn't actually happened in the school and it's got nothing to do with the school, it's not on a school platform. So conflicts that they're going to stay out of. However, if it happened within the school or on a school platform, a different story. I also encourage you to think about the consequences of either engaging or not engaging in the conflict. I know where people have, or workplaces have, got involved in conflict that is not necessarily workplace based. It's kind of created this Pandora's box of having to accommodate all of these, I guess, personality differences or things that have happened outside the workplace, but also what's the impact of not engaging. And we also need to consider, when we think about workplace conflict, our duty of care considerations under the Workplace Health and Safety Act, particularly with the incoming Code of Practice for managing psychosocial hazards in the workplace. So I would argue very strongly that unmanaged conflict within a workplace is probably breaching our duty of care in terms of that risk to people's psychological safety within the workplace. So the common responses to conflict, and probably the most common response, is avoiding it or ignoring it and hoping that it will go away. And look, sometimes that might actually work if it's something that's quite petty, or if it was just everybody was really busy and really stressed and it was just a kind of little outburst and, everybody's happy to move on. But in the majority of instances, avoiding conflict will only allow it to fester and probably get worse over time. Procrastination, particularly if you're managing a team, you've probably got a lot of jobs on your to-do list. So, not many people enjoy dealing with conflict. So we'll find lots of other things to keep ourselves busy with in order to avoid dealing with the conflict. Sometimes there's a refusal to engage or acknowledge that the conflict is actually happening. Also blaming other people. So we might, accommodate one or both parties, just calming each of them down, but not actually resolving the conflict. So, each party thinks that the manager's on their side, when in actual fact, the manager's kind of on both sides, and probably needs to let them both know that. And trying to force a solution to conflict. It's, kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. It's really not going to do anything in the long run, and it's not going to fix the source of the conflict. So if you've done any kind of conflict resolution training before, this is a fairly old model, but it kind of holds true in the sense that conflict generally goes through a series of stages, and the stages are, starting at a discomfort, so perhaps, nothing's actually been said or nothing's happened at this point, but there's a kind of a feeling, which will often escalate into a particular incident. And then if that incident or the conflict's not managed after that incident, then both parties or one party will develop this kind of filter in which they start to misunderstand or misinterpret. So if I think somebody doesn't like me, then everything that they say and do, I'm going to view with that lens, which may lead to misunderstandings. If it's not managed at that stage, it then creates a level of tension within the workplace. And if it's not managed at that tension point, then it can often hit crisis point. And that looks really different depending on the type of conflict, the type of people involved, the type of workplace you have. A really obvious example, and we've dealt with a few of these, is where there's actually been a physical assault within the workplace, or where somebody has gone out on workers' comp on stress leave, somebody has, made a serious bullying allegation against somebody, people sabotaging work, you know, a whole range of things. But all of those things that happen at crisis points are things that will create a lot more work for us in the long run and really have a damaging effect on our workplace culture. So yeah, the consequences of not addressing these, I think I just reeled all of those off at the crisis point there. So again, we have this, there's a huge focus at a national and state level around workplace bullying. So, you know, unmanaged conflict can definitely enter into the realms of bullying or harassment. And if a workplace doesn't do anything about that, then employees can actually go to Fair Work and request a stop bullying order, which is where Fair Work would actually come into the workplace and undertake an investigation to find out what's going on. There may be workers' compensation claims. People might resign, and in my experience, the people who resign are generally not the people you want to resign. It also has a really sort of negative impact on workplace culture and staff morale. And you know, if we kind of look at workplaces that don't proactively manage conflict, it sort of creates this sense of, oh well, you know, nobody seems to care that this is happening, and it's making us all feel really bad, but nobody cares. And so you get this kind of really, I guess, disengagement of the team, because the conflict is sort of impacting everybody, and the perception is no one's doing anything about it. Sometimes other people get involved, so you might have cliques or factions forming in the workplace, which again is really not great for workplace culture. And there's a perception of management as being somebody that doesn't particularly care, or in extreme cases, somebody that you know, is effectively endorsing or accepting that conflict in the workplace is something that's okay. And I probably should say at that point that, you know, healthy conflict, constructive and professional conflict, where people disagree with each other and can have a mature conversation about why they each disagree and hopefully better understand each other, is not the conflict I'm talking about right now. That kind of conflict, where you can do it in a respectful way, you know, is something that we should welcome. We don't want everybody just running around telling everybody what a great job they're doing if they're not. But yeah, so the conflict I'm talking about is the not helpful conflict, not the stuff that we actually get better ideas and better solutions out of. All right, so strategies to manage conflict effectively is really to get in as early as possible. And that's, I guess, that starting point of acknowledging that there is a conflict happening here and trying to find out what the cause is, and then getting on top of it before it escalates to that sort of tension and crisis point where it's very hard to bring it back from there as well. You know, once people have got to that point with each other, it's quite challenging to try and mediate those kind of disputes. And if you've looked into the cost of mediation recently, it's a very expensive process to get formal mediation in. Determine the most appropriate conflict management approach. So if you've seen the conflict management styles, that you've got a competitive conflict management style. So sometimes in a conflict, one person might be right and one person might be wrong. You know, and that's really where, as a manager or a leader, our job is to make sure that the person who is in the wrong understands why, and we give them enough knowledge and information to help make sure that doesn't happen in future. So perhaps somebody's misunderstood an expectation or a rule, and so we need to be the person that comes in. A competitive approach is where one party, I guess, wins, which is not a great term. One party is in the right and one party is potentially in the wrong. Collaboration is a great approach to conflict management, particularly for more complex issues, where you can kind of find a solution to the conflict where both parties are actually happy and that they both feel like they've won out of it. As I said, there are the odd conflicts, particularly those petty ones where, you know, you probably do just want to put your hand up and say, look, you know, no thanks, we're not getting involved in that. You were big enough and mature enough to deal with that yourself. Sometimes we might enter into a conflict situation when we need to accommodate one party, you know, and that may be if it is a bullying related or something that's in breach of our workplace policies and procedures or code of conduct. If one party is in breach, then, you know, we're definitely going to accommodate the victim, so to speak. Not a great word, but I think you get what I mean. In other cases, we might need both parties to kind of come to a compromise, and that's often the approach we'll take if there is a bit of a personality or values clash. is asking, the parties to really just be a little bit more tolerant and understanding of each other. So there isn't, a winner and a loser in the conflict. It's both parties really agree to kind of move forward together. Once you've kind of worked out how you're going to manage the current conflict, is thinking about, from an organisation perspective, what changes you can make to stop that issue occurring again. And that might involve clarifying roles, responsibilities, policies and procedures, undertaking some diversity or some communication training to help people be more accepting, more tolerant, better communicators, or better listeners. And in some cases, it might be some leadership or management training, development, coaching to help manage and identify conflicts, provide feedback to people, manage performance effectively. So when we do this, when we proactively manage conflict in the workplace, it creates a more respectful workplace behaviour, workplace culture. It also helps the team members respect the manager who is dealing with the conflict. It gives you a more positive workplace culture. You should retain more people, hopefully see less absenteeism, more engaged staff, which means more productive staff. And ideally in a workplace where everybody knows what they're doing, and people have like the skills and experience, you kind of end up with these self-managing teams so that they will sort of work together, and the decision making and what's right and what's wrong is really clear. I think self-managing teams are like the nirvana of leadership, because they really will just operate without any intervention from a leader or manager unless something out of the ordinary happens. The more you deal with conflict, the better you get at it, and whether that's dealing with conflict at your own level, or whether it's as a manager and leader. And the other thing that managing conflict proactively does is reduce the risk to the workplace and the team, both from a workplace health and safety and from a fair work perspective. So I've just thrown a few tips in there to help reach agreements if you are trying to, mediate a conflict. And also if you are involved in a conflict, and that's thinking about, acting, not reacting. So often conflicts will create these sort of emotional triggers which lead to emotional responses. But, pausing and thinking about, what do we actually want out of this conflict resolution process, and how do I, move forward or communicate to achieve that outcome. Seeing those disagreements as a problem to solve rather than sort of a battle or a war to be won. One of the things to make sure is that we're actually making sure that everybody's talking about the same thing in the conflict, because some conflicts, it's just a misunderstanding. Agree on how we're going to manage the conflict resolution process. Sometimes organisations like to bring in a third party. That can be quite expensive though. Emphasize the relationship. So often people will assume the other party's motivation is to, make them look or feel terrible, when in actual fact, it's really about, fixing something in the workplace or fixing something in how they interact with each other. And then just a couple of others around interpreting demands as opportunities. So, some of those demands might be find your way to resolve the problem or the cause of the conflict. Keeping that long-term perspective, keeping verbal weapons out of reach, so things like pulling rank or making threats, or, making excuses, hiding behind policy, and those sorts of things. Keep things informal. So, as it says, it's easier to toughen up than soften down. It's very hard to go back. Respecting the other party and testing our assumptions, stating our position and our understanding of the other person's position to make sure that we're all on the same page. I love this quote, and I think that this is a very good way of describing conflict. So people not getting along because they fear each other, people fearing each other because they don't know each other, and they don't know each other because they haven't really communicated with each other. And I think about times in my life where I've met people or started working with people, and my first impression of them was not great. Maybe I didn't particularly like them or like something about them. And the better I got to know them, then the more I found that I liked them. The reverse can also sometimes be true, but for the purposes of this exercise, let's go with the first example. So wrapping up, how we can help. So TCCI has a lot of experience in dealing with this kind of stuff in the workplace. We have a range of calendar training courses, or can do customised training courses on things like communication, conflict, respectful workplace behaviour, performance management, and even some of those personality or behavioural profiling tools. If it's something related to the Fair Work Act or a modern award and those sorts of things, then we do have the Workplace Relations helpline. We have done in the past investigations for workplaces where there's been accusations of bullying or harassment. We can also help you develop or review policies and procedures, provide one-on-one coaching or mentoring, and assist with dispute resolution, but probably not to the mediation level. And the number on there is our business hotline. So if you're not sure whether or not we might be able to help or refer you to someone that can, you can give us a call on that number, and we'll send you a copy of this presentation after the session. So that's it from the presentation perspective. Now I'm just going to